China recently declared that Western nations are not allowed to meddle in its relations with Russia concerning the ongoing crisis in Ukraine. In an interview with the Russian newspaper Izvestia, Zhang Hanhui, the Chinese ambassador to Russia, stated that China was not the cause of the war in Ukraine. He added that none of the parties concerned have received any weapons from them. Zhang added that China cannot be held accountable for the situation in Ukraine and that the West has no authority to tell Beijing what to do. Since many in the West and the US think they should be the main peacemakers in the war, this news is very hurtful to them. Zhang Hanhui, Beijing's ambassador to Russia, said that China should not allow the West to dictate how Beijing and Russia should handle the situation in Ukraine. Zhang claims that neither China nor any of the parties involved received any weaponry from China, which is why the crisis occurred. He also underlined that China is not to blame for the current state of affairs for the West. Although China and Russia are friends, they also wish to assist in resolving the issue between the two countries. They actually created a 12-point peace plan. People are concerned, though, that China might be supplying Russia with weaponry. According to a news source, Chinese businesses shipped 1,000 weapons, armor, and drone parts to Russia last month. Furthermore, one of the businesses has ties to the Chinese government. As French President Emmanuel Macron and European Commission official Ursula von der Leyen visited China, the Chinese ambassador gave a speech. They urged Chinese President Xi Jinping to put forth more effort in promoting peace, but in a different way. Xi Jinping was treated gently by the French president, who also invited him to speak with Russia. Von der Leyen, meantime, took a more direct approach. She stated that it is against international law to provide Moscow with weapons. Von Leyen predicted that this would harm ties between the EU and China, but Xi Jinping didn't appear to mind. He restated Beijing's identical to Russian position on the war in Ukraine. In line with the UN Charter, Xi Jinping called for the resumption of peace negotiations while taking all parties' security concerns into account. In line with this approach, the Chinese ambassador to Russia stated that China is advocating for dialogue and peace. Furthermore, China need to urge Russia to put a stop to the ongoing crisis in Ukraine, according to statements made by the US. US authorities reacted to a joint statement on the Russian-Ukrainian crisis made by China and Russia. John Kirby, a spokesman for the National Security Council, stated at the White House press briefing that nothing came out of the discussions. Additionally, he stated that the deal reached by the leaders of China and Russia implies that the conflict in Ukraine would soon come to an end. Kirby asked China to put pressure on Russia to cease bombing cities, hospitals, and schools and to remove its forces from Ukraine and its sovereign territory. Kirby further explained that although China should not be viewed as neutral in the fight, the US has no reason to suspect that it will give Russia lethal weaponry. Still, things are not getting better as G7 foreign ministers blame Russia for disseminating misleading information. In a planned joint statement, the foreign ministers of the G7 would charge Russia of utilizing misinformation to justify its activities in Ukraine. The ministers will denounce Russia for its actions in Ukraine and draw attention to its dissemination of false information, according to the draft statement that Japanese television was able to get. The foreign ministers of the G7 will also emphasize the value of having access to correct information and will promise their help in this regard. They will urge third nations to cease supplying Russia with armaments and will reiterate their commitment to upholding anti-Russian sanctions. Additionally, the conference will be held in Karuizawa, Japan. As was previously indicated, China has now voiced its concerns about the situation and offered a 12-point political solution. Many of the themes in this proposal are ones that China has already expressed, such as respecting state borders and adhering to the UN Charter. It does, however, also take aim at unjust sanctions and overly expansive US-led military alliances. The Chinese stance document does not contain any plans to bring peace to Ukraine. But it wasn't the author's goal in the first place. They wish to keep China out of the conflict. Rather, they aim to refute Western claims that China provided covert assistance to Russia. Additionally, they wish to demonstrate to other developing nations that China is a trustworthy and accountable world leader. Thus, there was much excitement when China's senior diplomat, Wang Yi, presented a proposal at the Munich Security Conference. There were high expectations for this paper. However, there was some disappointment when the paper was eventually released. It said very nothing about critical issues such as how to maintain Ukraine's security or resolve the dispute over land between Kyiv and Moscow. Furthermore, the paper's language lacked sufficient force to persuade readers to take any action. However, China had this entire plan in place since they didn't want to become overly involved in the conflict in Ukraine. An expert claims that China's ambiguous position on territorial disputes reveals its diverse and nuanced priorities. They prioritize maintaining territorial integrity over the right to self-determination, viewing themselves as its guardians. China is wary of separatist activities both within its borders and with regard to Taiwan. Russia and China have complementary economies and a shared border, which makes their partnership significant. In addition, Russia provides China with sophisticated weaponry such as missiles and fighter jets, as well as commodities. China would therefore wish to assist in preventing Putin from being removed if Russia were to lose in Ukraine and a pro-Western government were to be established, as this would be detrimental to China's strategic interests. Alongside a diplomatic assault, a position paper on Ukraine was written and released. In January 2024, Wang went to France and Italy to attend the Munich Security Conference. He had meetings with Dmytro Kuleba, the Foreign Minister of Ukraine, and Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State of the United States. After that, he traveled to Hungary and Russia, where he had meetings with Putin and other important figures. His journey was intended to convey a sense of shuttle diplomacy. It was only following this lengthy tour across Europe that the paper was published. Moscow offered some support for China's plan to move the dispute closer to settlement. Dmitry Peskov, Putin's spokeswoman, stated that it is being thoroughly considered. However, the Chinese plan was rejected by Kiev and the West. If they carried out the plan, US President Joe Biden told news media, he saw nothing positive for anyone other than Russia. It will be difficult for Beijing to be viewed as a broker of peace. The leaders of China were accused by the US and its allies of discussing the possibility of arming Russia. China bought gas and oil from Russia, supplied armaments components, and considered sending armed drones and other weaponry, according to Western media. These moves demonstrate that, despite its authorities' best efforts to stay out of a more protracted and bloody confrontation in Ukraine, Beijing will not easily become known as a peacemaker. But there are a lot of opposing sides to this dispute, so even specialists are unsure of what will ultimately transpire. Due to extreme weather and sanctions imposed by the US and Europe on Russian oil exports, Moscow is said to have loosened regulations to permit port operations during significant storms, enabling the country to continue exporting oil at a steady pace. In an interview with Reuters, traders stated that lifting limitations at Russian ports to sustain export income had risks related to technology and the environment. In order to allow more tankers to load at the ports, Reuters quoted 3 unidentified traders as claiming that Russian ports had received unofficial recommendations to load even during a storm and to avoid imposing undue limitations when faced with ice. According to trader testimony, loadings had gone on at a port in Novorossiysk despite seas as high as 3 meters. Furthermore, according to Reuters, a lack of tankers as a result of Western sanctions has resulted in the easing of ice-class limitations at Baltic ports. According to an ecological official quoted by Reuters, Russia will not be relaxing regulations for oil loadings from ports under the law, notwithstanding the unofficial relaxation of limitations. Due to US sanctions, it was reported last week that 10 million barrels of Russian petroleum in 14 tankers were left stranded off the coast of South Korea. Several ships and businesses that were shipping Russia's Sokol grade from the Sakhalin-1 project were sanctioned by the US. Through sanctions and a G7 price restriction put in place more than a year ago, the US is still trying to limit Moscow's oil revenue. What are your thoughts on China's shocking move with Russia? Let me know down below. If you want to continue to learn about business investing and financial education, we have got this video waiting on the screen for you to check out. Don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe for more videos like this. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.